The $100 billion trial was over. Not because the jury decided, but because the highest-paid lawyer in the city ran for the hills. Then, a voice from the back of the room, a voice belonging to the man who cleans the floors, delivered the line that changed everything. "I object." Spencer Johnson stood in the courtroom, his worn work boots planted firmly on the polished marble as silence fell. "Your Honor, I object to that motion," he declared, his voice deep and measured, an intense focus radiating from his eyes that demanded attention. Jason Scoffield, the abandoned biotech titan, looked up in stunned disbelief as the 58-year-old black courthouse janitor walked forward. Neither man knew that this moment, the janitor's unlikely stand, was the only thing that would uncover the massive pharmaceutical cabal that had destroyed Spencer's career 2 decades earlier. Before we dive into this astonishing fight for justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe everyone deserves a fair chance, regardless of their wealth or station, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about everyday heroes standing up against corporate discrimination. Now, let's look at the chaos inside the Federal District Court in Boston. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on as Jason Scoffield, the 39-year-old Caucasian founder of Chronogene Innovations, sat isolated and alone at the defense table. He faced devastating $100 billion financial fraud charges that threatened to erase his entire biotech empire. For 8 weeks, his lead counsel, Silas Vance, billing thousands per hour, had controlled the room. But today, Vance had sent a single, cryptic text, immediate resignation citing ethical conflicts. The prosecution, with poorly concealed satisfaction, moved swiftly to disqualify the defense counsel and push for a default judgment. Judge Harrison, a stern figure, peered down at Jason, ready to deliver the ruinous order. "Mr. Scoffield, where is your representation?" Jason, defeated, could only shake his head. It was then the voice came, deep, measured, and startlingly firm. "Your Honor, I object to that motion." All eyes snapped to Spencer Johnson, the man everyone overlooked, standing tall in his frayed work shirt and janitorial jumpsuit. The prosecutor scoffed, calling the intervention an absurdity. Spencer remained utterly steady. "I am here to serve as counsel for Mr. Scoffield." He reached into his worn wallet and produced his certified, though inactive, state bar card. The entire courtroom was silenced by the proof that the man sweeping the floors was, technically, a lawyer. Judge Harrison, fighting to maintain control, asked Jason directly. Jason studied Spencer's determined face, recognizing the integrity the elite lawyers lacked. "Yes, Your Honor," Jason said, his voice surprisingly firm. "I accept Mr. Johnson as my attorney." A security guard attempted to block Spencer's path to the defense table, but Spencer simply displayed the bar card again. "I am an attorney." The judge, visibly vexed, granted a short, emergency recess for Spencer to confer with his client. As the courtroom doors slammed shut on the whispers, the billion-dollar defendant turned to his janitor lawyer and asked the only question that mattered. "Why did you do this?" Jason Scoffield, the typically composed founder of Chronogene, looked utterly disheveled. He was a man accustomed to having answers delivered instantly, not having to beg for them from the man who typically emptied his office trash. Spencer Johnson didn't waste time on pleasantries. He led Jason away from the defense table, past the silent security guards, and down a rarely used staircase to a small, dusty records office in the courthouse basement, a room Spencer knew was never monitored. "Mr. Scoffield," Spencer began, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial register as he flipped the lock on the heavy oak door. "You're asking the wrong question. It's not about why I did it, but who I am." Jason stared at the janitor's uniform, then down at the worn bar card Spencer had tucked into his pocket.
"Fine.
"Who are you really? A disgruntled former associate of Vance's? A legal savant waiting for his moment." Spencer pulled a wooden chair from a desk piled high with archived case files and sat down, rubbing the faint scar above his eyebrow. "I was a partner at the 5th largest regulatory law firm in this city 20 years ago. I was on the fast track, the golden boy. Then, I found something I shouldn't have." He paused, letting the silence of the basement swallow them. I was framed for witness tampering. It was airtight, professionally executed. I lost my career, my home, my reputation, everything. I was disbarred and disgraced. Spencer reached out and picked up a copy of Veritas Pharmaceuticals versus State of Massachusetts, resting on the desk, its name a chilling coincidence. The company that framed me? Veritas Pharmaceuticals. The name landed like a hammer blow. Veritas Pharmaceuticals was one of the largest players in the legacy drug market and, more crucially, one of the founding entities of the Medusa Group, the very shadow consortium driving the legal and media attacks against chronogene innovations. You're telling me this isn't just about a stolen algorithm or financial fraud, Jason realized, the color draining from his face. It's personal for you. And it's the same people. It's the same people using the same playbook, Spencer confirmed, the quiet intensity in his eyes blazing. 20 years ago, I uncovered their massive cover-up involving faulty pediatric medication, a deadly drug they knowingly kept on the market. They ended me to silence the truth. Now, they're trying to end you to steal your truth. Spencer leaned forward, planting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. They want you to lose this case so they can bankrupt Chronogene, seize your intellectual property in the bankruptcy sale, and bury your technology forever. They don't want the money you supposedly defrauded them of. They want to suppress the cure. Jason stood up, pacing the small room, the truth of his predicament finally sinking in deeper than any financial threat. The cure, he whispered, referring to Chronogene's technology. They know what it does. They know it's not just a computing advance. He stopped pacing and looked Spencer directly in the eye, the billionaire's facade finally cracking to reveal the fearful innovator beneath. Spencer, my chronogene technology isn't just personalized medicine. It isolates and corrects faulty genetic markers for all chronic, mass-market diseases, cancer, diabetes, heart failure. If it goes mainstream, the entire market for symptomatic drugs, the pills that manage the disease but never truly fix it, collapses overnight. Jason ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. We're not talking about a $100 billion lawsuit anymore. We're talking about trillions of dollars in annual revenue for the entire Medusa Group. We're not fighting a case. We're fighting a shadow government built on maintaining global sickness. Spencer nodded slowly. I knew the stakes were high, but this is a fight for the future of human health. That's why Vance quit, or rather, why he was paid to quit. He was the mole clearing the field so the Medusa Group could deliver the killing blow with the default judgment. The two men, divided by race, class, and 2 decades of completely opposite lives, now saw their fates irrevocably linked by a common, powerful enemy. Jason, the man who had everything, was betrayed by the system he trusted. Spencer, the man who had nothing but his quiet dignity, understood the system's cruelty intimately. I only have my janitorial salary and a decades-old inactive law license, Spencer warned. And they're already watching us. If we do this, it will be messy, dangerous, and likely illegal on their part. I will need access to everything you have immediately. Jason extended his hand, not condescendingly, but with a new respect. My company, my life, my billions, they are all at your disposal, Mr. Johnson. I've tried fighting them with money and the best lawyers. Now, let's try fighting them with truth. Spencer met his gaze, the quiet janitor replaced by the sharp, determined lawyer of 20 years ago. The handshake sealed their unlikely alliance, 2 desperate men bound by the promise of justice against the vast, dark influence of the Medusa Group. The trial was about to start again, but this time, the true defendant was system itself. The emergency recess granted by the disgruntled Judge Harrison was short, but it was all the time Spencer and Jason needed to execute a clean escape from the courthouse. They moved the entire operation, the $100 billion defense, from the dusty basement office to a nondescript, secure warehouse owned by Chronogene, a facility so technologically isolated it was nicknamed the Vault. The contrast between the 2 men inside the vault was stark. Jason, in his custom Italian suit, watched anxiously as Spencer, still in his janitorial jumpsuit, laid out the entire contents of Silas Vance's defense files across a conference table. Spencer didn't touch the complex financial projections or the patent disputes. He went straight for the procedural documents. Vance wasn't just incompetent, Mr. Scoffield, Spencer stated, his finger tracing a margin note on a motion to dismiss. He was meticulous in his betrayal. Spencer pointed out 3 specific instances where Vance had failed to file mandatory discovery requests that Spencer knew, from his decades of observing the system, would have forced the prosecution to hand over potentially exculpatory evidence. Vance had also deliberately miscited a key precedent in regulatory law that would have limited the scope of the fraud charges. The negligence is too precise, Spencer concluded. This isn't throwing a case. This is preparing a battlefield for surrender. Vance was paid to make sure that when he walked out, the legal ground beneath you was already mined. Jason felt a cold, hard lump settle in his gut. The sheer arrogance of trusting the best had nearly cost him everything. How do we prove he was paid? The $20 million success fee he declared, it's probably buried in shell companies. That's where we need a mole of our own, Spencer replied. He pulled out a worn flip phone, a relic he preferred to Jason's biometric smartphone, and punched in a number. The man on the other end was James Washington, an old paralegal and Spencer's closest confidant from his days at the regulatory firm, now retired and living quietly in South Carolina. James had been the only person Spencer trusted to know his history and the only person who believed in his wrongful disbarment. Spencer kept his voice low and urgent, detailing the stakes, the Medusa Group, Veritas, and the $20 million betrayal by Silas Vance. $20 million to lose a case? James's voice crackled over the line, carrying an echo of the old righteous anger. That's low, even for those suits. Give me the names and the dates, Spence. I still have contacts in accounting forensics who owe me favors. We'll follow the money. With the investigation underway, Spencer turned his attention to the courtroom. He had to prepare to cross-examine the prosecution's star financial expert, Dr. Alicia Cross, a critical step that was only 3 days away. But first, he had to secure his legal standing and Jason's immediate safety. You have to hire me officially, Spencer instructed Jason. Not as counsel, but as an advisory attorney for the recusal hearing. It gives me a legitimate function until Judge Harrison officially accepts my bar status. Jason immediately drew up a contract, offering Spencer a retainer that dwarfed his janitorial salary. Spencer signed it, the simple act feeling more monumental than any contract Jason had ever signed. Then, the retaliation started. Spencer's simple flip phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number, a photo of Spencer's modest apartment door, with a red circle drawn around the lock. The accompanying text was concise and chilling. Focus on the floors, Johnson. You're done in court. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. A moment later, his supervisor's name flashed on the screen. Mr. Johnson, the supervisor's voice was strained. I just got a call from someone very high up. They know you were in the courtroom today. They are demanding your immediate termination for unprofessional conduct and dereliction of duty. They even sent pictures. Spencer felt a familiar, cold wave of recognition. The Medusa Group was using its power to attack the only thing he had left, his job, his simple, steady life. They were tightening the screws, showing him that even his small sphere of anonymity was not safe from their trillions of dollars in influence. Tell them, Spencer said, his voice flat, that I respectfully decline their resignation request. I will be taking an approved, unpaid leave of absence, effective immediately. And tell them I look forward to seeing them in court. Spencer hung up, the weight of the conspiracy heavier than the mop he no longer carried. He looked at Jason, whose face was a mixture of concern and a deepening respect for the fight Spencer had endured for 2 decades. They just fired you from the only job you had, Jason observed. No, Mr. Scoffield, Spencer corrected, picking up Vance's discarded legal pad. They just confirmed that we are on the right track. And now, I have more time for your case. The threat only solidified the alliance. Spencer was now entirely dependent on Jason, and Jason's survival rested entirely on Spencer's vengeance. The 2 men got back to work, hunting for the systemic flaw that would bring down a trillion-dollar empire. With Spencer's janitorial job sacrificed and his legal status still hanging in procedural limbo, the fight moved from the shadowy corporate world back into the bright, unforgiving light of the courtroom. Their first target wasn't the prosecution's case. It was the foundation of the justice being served. The Medusa Group doesn't just pay lawyers to betray their clients, Spencer explained to Jason, pointing to a diagram of corporate subsidiaries James Washington had quickly assembled. They infect the entire process. And Judge Harrison is infected. James Washington's network had worked with quiet efficiency. Within 24 hours, the retired paralegal had delivered irrefutable evidence. Judge Harrison's husband, Thomas H. Harrison, wasn't just a lawyer. He was a highly paid, long-time lobbyist for Veritas Pharmaceuticals' parent company. The conflict of interest is fundamental, Spencer declared, pacing the vault. Every ruling she makes, every glance she gives the jury, is tainted by the fact that her family's wealth relies on the success of the very conspiracy trying to destroy you. Spencer worked through the night, drafting a motion for recusal that was less a legal document and more an indictment of the system itself. He meticulously cited precedents on judicial ethics and marital financial ties, ensuring the motion was too technically sound for Judge Harrison to simply dismiss, no matter how much she desired to stay on the high-profile case. The next morning, the federal district court was once again packed, buzzier than before due to the unprecedented drama of the janitor lawyer. Spencer, in a dark, ill-fitting suit Jason had hastily bought him, stood before Judge Harrison. "Your Honor," Spencer began, his voice calm yet penetrating, "the defense is moving for an immediate recusal of this court based on irrefutable evidence of financial and familial conflict of interest directly tied to the prosecution's corporate beneficiaries." Judge Harrison's face turned a mottled shade of red, her composure instantly fracturing. "Mr. Johnson, you have barely been admitted to counsel, and you dare to impugn the integrity of this court." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Spencer pressed on, refusing to be intimidated, "the integrity of this entire proceeding is already compromised. I submit documentation proving that your husband, Thomas H. Harrison, has received seven-figure compensation over the last 5 years lobbying on behalf of the holding company that controls Veritas Pharmaceuticals, the same Veritas Pharmaceuticals whose market collapse is the true motivation for the prosecution's case." Spencer laid the documents on the clerk's desk, turning the paper trail into tangible proof of corruption. The prosecution scrambled, but they had no defense for the irrefutable records. They had thought their influence was hidden behind layers of shell companies and high-priced lobbyists. They hadn't counted on a janitor with a 20-year memory and a relentless mentor. After a tense, hour-long deliberation in chambers, Judge Harrison returned. Her face was pale, her voice tight with thinly veiled fury. "The motion for recusal is granted. This court finds the appearance of a conflict sufficient to warrant reassignment. The case is transferred to Judge Eliza Sterling." It was a small victory, but a crucial one. Spencer had successfully cut the head off the snake in the courtroom, proving that even a powerful judge was just a pawn in the Medusa Group's game. Judge Sterling, an unknown quantity, took over the case that afternoon. She was younger, sharp, and seemingly unbound by the local power structure. She immediately mandated that the trial resume the next day, giving Spencer virtually no time to prepare for the critical cross-examination of the financial expert, Dr. Alicia Cross. Spencer returned to the vault. The chaos of the recusal was over. Now the real work began. "Cross is the foundation of their entire fraud charge," Jason stated, pointing to a sprawling whiteboard covered in financial models. She testified that Chronogene knowingly undervalued assets to manipulate the IPO. "It's all based on her independent valuation." "Her valuation isn't independent, Mr. Scoffield," Spencer countered, tapping the name Dr. Alicia Cross on the board. "The Medusa Group paid Vance. They paid the judge's husband. It stands to reason they paid their star witness, too." Spencer and James Washington turned their attention from the judicial branch to the financial one. They needed to find the money trail to Dr. Cross. Spencer didn't bother trying to decode the complex financial fraud itself. He focused entirely on the witness's motive and credibility. He instructed Jason to pull every consulting contract Cross had signed in the last 3 years, hunting for a phantom payment, a hidden bonus, anything that tied her to Veritas Pharmaceuticals. With the clock ticking down to the most important cross-examination of the trial, Spencer finally allowed himself a moment of grim reflection. He was fighting a war on 3 fronts: against the prosecution, against the vast corporate influence of the Medusa Group, and against his own past, which he knew the cabal was preparing to weaponize against him. But for the first time in 2 decades, he felt truly alive, fighting not just for Jason, but for the justice that had been denied to him years ago. The courtroom atmosphere under Judge Sterling was taut, clinical, and unforgiving. Unlike Judge Harrison's haughty disdain, Sterling's scrutiny was neutral, giving Spencer no quarter, but affording him the opportunity to fight. Jason Scoffield watched from the defense table, his fate resting on the performance of a man who, until days ago, had been mopping the very floor they now stood on. The prosecution's star financial expert, Dr. Alicia Cross, a woman whose credentials glittered with degrees and prestigious consulting roles, sat confidently on the stand. She was the anchor of the government's case, the professional authority who testified that Jason Scoffield had knowingly, fraudulently, and massively undervalued Chronogene's assets. Prosecutor Miller finished his direct examination, laying out a complex web of financial analysis designed to confuse and convict. He concluded with a triumphant flourish. The evidence is clear. Dr. Cross has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant engineered a $100 billion fraud for personal gain. Spencer, dressed in his dark, slightly too large suit, walked slowly to the lectern. He ignored the thick stack of financial binders Cross had brought. "Good morning, Dr. Cross," Spencer began, his voice calm and deliberate, utterly lacking the aggression of a typical cross-examination. "I have no intention of arguing with your calculus. I'm sure your numbers are flawless. I simply want to discuss your commitment to impartiality." Dr. Cross shifted uncomfortably. "My ethics are beyond reproach, Mr. Johnson." "Of course," Spencer agreed smoothly. "But tell me, in the last 3 years, have you done any consulting work for Veritas Pharmaceuticals or any of its holding companies?" Prosecutor Miller was instantly on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant, prejudicial, and outside the scope of direct examination. The defense intends to prove the witness's motivation and bias, Your Honor," Spencer countered, meeting Judge Sterling's gaze. "I assure the court this is highly relevant." Judge Sterling hesitated, sensing the shift in the courtroom's dynamic. "Objection overruled. Answer the question, Dr. Cross." Cross stammered slightly. I have advised various firms in the pharmaceutical sector. I believe I consulted for a subdivision of Veritas on a patent valuation 2 years ago." 2 years ago," Spencer repeated, his voice dropping slightly. "And did that consultation involve a sum exceeding $50,000? "Yes." "Did you receive any further, unrelated payments from any entity tied to Veritas Pharmaceuticals in the last 6 months?" Cross was visibly sweating now, her academic composure gone. "I received a performance bonus related to that consulting work." Spencer turned to the judge. "Your Honor, permission to enter Defense Exhibit C. 1. Certified bank records secured via subpoena into evidence." The clerk took the envelope. Spencer, using a projector, displayed a single, damning line item from the bank records: a wire transfer of $1.8 million from a Delaware-based shell company identified by James Washington, routed directly to Dr. Cross's personal account. The date of the transfer: 3 days before she delivered her expert testimony to the prosecution. "Dr. Cross," Spencer's voice cut through the silence, no longer polite, but laced with cold, hard fury. "This $1.8 million wire transfer is dated 3 days before you signed your valuation report. Was this performance bonus, or was this your payment to testify against Chronogene Innovations and secure a victory for your primary source of wealth, the Medusa Group?" Cross completely broke. She stammered a denial, but her eyes were darting wildly, unable to meet the jury's horrified gazes. The impact was devastating. Spencer hadn't dismantled the numbers. He had dismantled the very credibility of the prosecution's case, proving their star witness was nothing more than a highly paid mercenary. Spencer concluded with a simple, crushing blow. I have no further questions for this paid corporate witness. The jury, their eyes wide with shock and realization, now saw the $100 billion case not as a complex fraud, but as a rigged game. The fallout was immediate and vicious. That evening, before Dr. Cross could even be cross-examined again, the Medusa Group launched its retaliatory strike. Major news platforms, fueled by anonymous leaks, suddenly ran sensational reports. Janitor lawyer's dark past exposed, disbarred for witness tampering 2 decades ago. The articles painted Spencer as a career criminal and a fraudster, arguing his appearance in court was a stunt designed to distract from his own lack of integrity. The character assassination was massive, desperate, and effective. The next morning, Judge Sterling, her neutrality now severely tested, opened the session with an emergency hearing. The courtroom tension was no longer about money or patents. It was about the man fighting the system. Spencer Johnson was forced to stand before the court not as an attorney, but as a defendant of his own past, facing the very prejudice and systemic corruption that had destroyed his life 20 years prior. The morning after the character assassination campaign hit the media, the air in Judge Sterling's courtroom was toxic. Every lawyer, every spectator, and every juror knew about the headlines. Janitor lawyer, disbarred for tampering. The Medusa Group's counterstrike was tactical brilliance. They hadn't denied the conspiracy. They had simply discredited the messenger. Judge Sterling, her expression severe, called an emergency hearing. Mr. Johnson, she began, her tone devoid of previous neutrality. Given the very public accusations regarding your past conduct and your subsequent disbarment for witness tampering, the court must address whether you maintain the necessary ethical standing to represent the defendant in a case of this magnitude. The prosecution's lawyer, Miller, stood, radiating smug satisfaction. Your Honor, the integrity of the bar cannot be compromised. Mr. Johnson's past is not a distraction. It is a pattern of corruption. He must be disqualified, and the defense ruled in default. Jason Scoffield leaned forward, whispering anxiously to Spencer. Tell them it was framed. Tell them it was veritas. Don't let them disqualify you. Spencer, however, needed no prompting. He stood, not moving to the lectern, but remaining by the defense table, standing tall in his ill-fitting suit. He did not deny the disbarment. Your Honor, I was disbarred 28 years ago, Spencer admitted, his voice carrying the weight of decades. But the prosecution and the Medusa Group are using this public forum not to question my ethics, but to ensure the truth behind this trial remains buried. He turned, addressing the jury directly, his eyes locking onto theirs with unflinching honesty. They speak of witness tampering, but they don't speak of the drug, the pediatric medication, that Veritas Pharmaceuticals knowingly kept on the market, the drug that sickened hundreds of children, which I was ready to expose. They didn't disbar me because I tampered with a witness. They disbarred me because I threatened their profit and they used their influence to manufacture the evidence to take me down. Spencer's voice gained force, turning the hearing into a powerful, spontaneous closing argument. What you are witnessing here, today, is not an ethical review. It is Veritas Pharmaceuticals' playbook. They use money to pay experts like Dr. Cross. They use money to lobby judges like Harrison. And when an honest man, whether a billionaire innovator or a former attorney turned janitor, dares to expose them, they use that money to fabricate a past and destroy his character. He pointed at the prosecution. The charges against Mr. Scoffield, the so-called fraud, are simply the latest chapter in the Medusa Group's long, documented history of using the legal system as a weapon to maintain their global stranglehold on medicine. My history is not a stain. It is the key to understanding this conspiracy. The courtroom was silent. Judge Sterling watched Spencer, her expression slowly changing from skeptical concern to grudging, professional respect. Spencer hadn't cleared his name legally, but he had leveraged the attack to validate their entire conspiracy claim in the eyes of the jury. Judge Sterling slammed her gavel down. The motion for disqualification is denied. Mr. Johnson's past is noted, but his license remains active, and the defendant has a right to counsel. We proceed. The victory was fleeting. As the emergency recess was called, a different, more chilling kind of noise erupted, the sound of breaking glass and panicked screams from the courthouse entrance. Before anyone could react, the courtroom doors burst open. Two figures, heavily built and wearing dark, nondescript clothing, stormed into the room. One carried a pistol. The other rushed toward the defense table. "Get the evidence," one man shouted, aiming directly for Jason. The attack was not aimed at intimidation. It was a clear attempt to seize the critical evidence they knew Spencer and James had secured, and potentially to silence Jason forever. The courtroom descended into chaos as spectators dove for cover. Spencer acted purely on instinct. He wasn't thinking like a lawyer. He was moving like a protector. As the armed man leveled the pistol, Spencer shoved Jason violently behind the defense table. The shot went wide, shattering the paneling above them. The second assailant, focused on the table, lunged. Spencer threw his body over Jason's briefcase, the briefcase containing the newly secured files, shielding it. The assailant, unable to grab the briefcase, delivered a brutal kick to Spencer's ribs before the security team finally reacted and overwhelmed the attackers. The brief, violent episode proved Spencer's earlier claim with horrifying clarity. This was no longer a corporate fraud case. It was a matter of life and death, an act of conspiracy to commit murder orchestrated by the terrified Medusa Group. As Spencer, breathing heavily and nursing a throbbing pain in his side, was helped to his feet, he looked at Jason. The billionaire was shaken but unharmed. Jason's eyes, full of shock and now profound gratitude, confirmed the shift in their alliance. The janitor had not just defended his case, he had saved his life. The Medusa Group had exposed their desperation, and Spencer had just survived their worst physical attack. The war was officially on. The cleanup crew was still sweeping glass from the courtroom floor, and the FBI was interviewing witnesses when Spencer and Jason, flanked by two private security agents hastily hired by Chronogene, retreated to the vault. Spencer was sore and bruised from the kick he took protecting the briefcase, but his mind was sharper than ever. The attack had been a declaration of war, and it had fundamentally changed their strategy. "They didn't send gunmen for a financial fraud case, Mr. Scoffield," Spencer stated, pouring himself a glass of water. "They sent them for the cure. And they knew exactly when and where to hit to get the evidence." Jason, still visibly shaken from the near assassination, ran a scan over the list of files Spencer had protected. The evidence they wanted was here, the unredacted R&D logs and the accounting drafts Vance buried. But only a handful of people knew those documents existed, and only one person outside of me had access to the raw data and the internal financial systems that were supposedly fraudulent. Spencer looked at the Chronogene organizational chart Jason had pinned to the wall. He already knew the answer. The attack had confirmed his worst suspicion. The conspiracy wasn't merely corporate and external, it was intimate and internal. Spencer's eyes landed on the name beneath Jason's own, Dr. Evelyn Scoffield, head of research and development. "The primary evidence against you, the manipulated asset valuation, the alleged inflation of R&D expenses, was derived from internal data that only a few people could touch without setting off a massive audit flag," Spencer articulated, his voice low with grim certainty. That person needed both the scientific knowledge to understand how to subtly misclassify the data and the financial access to make it look like fraud. And they needed motive. Jason stared at the name of his own cousin, the woman he had practically grown up with and trusted with his multi-billion-dollar dream. The familial betrayal hit him with an emotional force far greater than any financial loss. "Evelyn," Jason whispered, collapsing into a chair.
"Why?
"We built this together." She was next in line to take over the company. "Next in line, but not the line," Spencer countered, tapping the name. "The Medusa Group doesn't trust outsiders. They use resentment." I looked into her career track. She was brilliant, yes, but perpetually overshadowed by you. Was she passed over for CEO when you briefly considered stepping down last year? Jason nodded, the pain visible in his face. I offered her the COO spot, but she wanted the top job. She said I humiliated her. There is your motive, Spencer confirmed. Jealousy, resentment, and a massive bribe from Veritas Pharmaceuticals. They gave her the financial and psychological incentive to become their inside operative. The investigation immediately pivoted from Silas Vance to Evelyn. James Washington, back in South Carolina, focused on tracing the digital ghost of the betrayal. Within hours, James delivered a breakthrough, a series of encrypted communication logs between Evelyn's offsite server and known IP addresses linked to Veritas Pharmaceuticals. More critically, he found a burner bank account linked to Evelyn that had received 4 large, untraceable cryptocurrency payments over the last 8 months, totaling just over $5 million. The money had been wired through 3 different international shell companies, the same labyrinthine route Spencer had seen Veritas use 20 years prior. She's the key, Spencer summarized. She's the one who gave them the internal logs to start the fraud investigation, and she's the one who gave Vance the procedural errors to guarantee the loss. She's the final piece of proof that this entire case is a conspiracy. They had enough circumstantial evidence to convince the jury of a conspiracy, but to get a full dismissal and trigger a criminal investigation into the Medusa Group, they needed something irrefutable: Evelyn's confession or the original, unmanipulated R&D files. Spencer looked at the trial schedule. The defense was due to present its final rebuttal in 2 days. He made the most shocking strategic decision of the trial yet. "We're not calling our own financial expert," Spencer told Jason. "We're not wasting time debunking their numbers. We're calling Dr. Evelyn Scoffield as a hostile defense witness." Jason looked terrified. "She'll lie under oath. She's family. She knows our weaknesses, and she'll have been prepped by their team for months." "They prepped her to be a silent leak, not a witness," Spencer corrected. "She is a scientist, Mr. Scoffield, trained in logic, not legal theatrics. We hit her with the scientific evidence she can't deny, we hit her with the money she can't explain, and we break her on the stand. She's the emotional core of this betrayal, and she's the final witness we need to validate every single one of our claims." The plan was fraught with risk, but the alternative was certain financial and legal death. Spencer and Jason spent the next 36 hours drilling the cross-examination, preparing every psychological trap and technical question designed to force the traitorous cousin into a corner. They knew the Medusa Group would be watching, and this final confrontation would be the most dangerous yet. The emotional wreckage of the previous day, the character assassination, and the shocking courtroom attack gave way to a chilling calm. Judge Sterling, now fully aware that the stakes were life and death, had tightened security to a federal level. Spencer, his ribs aching beneath a makeshift wrap, walked into the courtroom beside Jason. His plan for this final day was simple: force the truth out of the traitor, Dr. Evelyn Scoffield. The prosecution, smelling blood after their media success, was confident. They believed the janitor had exhausted his tricks. They were wrong. Spencer called Evelyn to the stand. She was poised, dressed impeccably, and delivered rehearsed denials with a chilling calmness. For the first 20 minutes, Spencer played a slow game, asking technical questions about Chronogene's R&D documentation procedures. Evelyn, the scientist, answered with precision, her arrogance showing through. Then, Spencer struck. "Dr. Scoffield," Spencer asked, his voice low, "on the afternoon of October 14, 2023, did you communicate via an encrypted messaging service with a contact named Phoenix Rising?" Evelyn's composure instantly shattered. Her eyes darted toward the prosecution table. "Objection. Hearsay, Your Honor. And completely irrelevant." "Irrelevant," Spencer challenged, turning to the judge. "This communication directly relates to the manipulation of asset data used to frame the defendant. This is the heart of the conspiracy, Your Honor." Judge Sterling allowed the line of questioning. Spencer proceeded to detail the 4 cryptocurrency payments Evelyn had received, matching the dates to key sabotage actions in the company. He didn't ask her if she was paid. He asked her to explain the source of the untraceable $5 million. Backed into a corner, Evelyn resorted to a well-rehearsed denial, but the pressure was too much. Spencer shifted to the scientific evidence. The original R&D files that proved Chronogene's technology was not fraudulently overvalued, but actually undervalued because of secret data suppressions. Dr. Scoffield, Spencer pressed, holding up a printout of an encrypted message. Where is the full, unmanipulated R&D log for Project Chimera that was recorded on your private server? The one you encrypted and copied before you deleted the original? Evelyn paled, realizing the depth of James Washington's forensic recovery. She reached into her blazer pocket with a trembling hand, not to retrieve a document, but to destroy the evidence. In her hand was a tiny, unmarked thumb drive. "I'm sorry, Jason," she muttered, her eyes vacant with panic as she attempted to crush the drive in her fist. The courtroom exploded. Security personnel instantly surrounded the witness stand. Spencer moved faster. Leaning over the railing, he reached Evelyn's hand just as she squeezed it shut. A brief, violent struggle ensued as Spencer fought to secure the tiny piece of plastic. The judge banged her gavel wildly. "Order. Order in this court." Spencer succeeded. He wrenched the drive free, holding it aloft as Evelyn screamed, admitting the betrayal with her actions more loudly than any words. The confrontation was the final, devastating piece of courtroom drama. Judge Sterling immediately called a recess, ordering the thumb drive seized and analyzed by the court's digital forensic team. Jason, horrified by his cousin's public breakdown, found Spencer in the hallway. "Spencer, that drive, it has to be the proof. It has to have the video footage, the emails." "It does," Spencer confirmed, leaning heavily against the wall. "It has the truth they tried to kill us for." But the Medusa Group was not done. As the forensic team worked feverishly inside the courthouse, a muffled, tremendous boom echoed from outside. The building shuddered. A security guard, frantic, ran through the hall. Explosion. Vehicle fire in the employee garage. Massive blast. Spencer and Jason rushed to the nearest window, overlooking the garage. Below, black smoke billowed from the charred remains of a single vehicle. It was Spencer's modest, battered pickup truck. The final, desperate threat was clear. "You may have the evidence, but we will kill you before you present it." The bomb hadn't just destroyed Spencer's property, it had physically targeted the man who defied them, leaving him winded and rattled, a painful reminder of the price of fighting for justice. When the recess ended, Spencer, despite the pain, refused medical attention beyond a quick bandage for a deep cut on his forearm sustained during the drive struggle. His suit was dusted with soot from the blast, his hair was disheveled, and the bandage was stark white against his dark skin. He walked back into the courtroom, a physical manifestation of defiance. The ultimate confrontation was about to begin. Spencer Johnson, the former janitor, standing bruised and broken, was ready to deliver the closing arguments that would either bring down the conspirators or bury him forever. Spencer Johnson, bruised, dusted with soot from the blast, and bandaged on his forearm, approached the jury box for his final address. He ignored the prosecutor's triumphant smirk and the heavy security presence that now encircled the courtroom. He was no longer the janitor. He was the embodiment of righteous, exhausted justice. He started not with the law, but with the rubble in the parking garage. "Members of the jury," Spencer began, his voice gravelly from the effort, but resonating with profound conviction. "2 days ago, you watched me dismantle the credibility of the prosecution's key financial witness. Yesterday, you watched armed men invade this courtroom to silence the defendant. And this morning, you heard the explosion that destroyed my property, a final, desperate attempt to stop me from speaking to you right now." He rested his bandaged hand lightly on the lectern. "This case is not about $100 billion. It is about a cure versus corporate greed. It is about whether a group of pharmaceutical giants, the Medusa Group, can be allowed to use their trillions of dollars to buy lawyers, buy experts, buy judges, and even buy the silence of those they deem beneath them, simply to ensure that sickness remains profitable." Spencer then delivered the final, undeniable proof. He turned to Judge Sterling, who nodded curtly. "Your Honor, the defense is prepared to present the contents of the thumb drive that Dr. Evelyn Scoffield attempted to destroy on this very stand. The evidence she risked jail and her soul to hide. The lights dimmed. On the projection screen flashed a video file recovered from the drive, a clandestine meeting of the CEOs of Veritas Pharmaceuticals and other Medusa Group entities, discussing in clinical detail their plan to fabricate financial fraud against Jason Scoffield and acquire chronogene through bankruptcy to suppress the genetic cure. The evidence was immediate and devastating. The video showed the exact conspiracy Spencer had claimed, confirming the motive, the method, and the complicity of the most powerful people in global pharmaceuticals. Prosecutor Miller stood frozen, his face a mask of defeat and shock, realizing he had been used as an unwitting tool of a criminal conspiracy. Spencer ended his argument simply. The truth, jury, is that Mr. Scoffield is innocent. The fraud was committed by his accusers. Now, I ask you to send a message that in this courtroom, justice belongs to everyone, even the man who cleans the floor, and that no amount of money can buy the truth. The jury was out for less than an hour. The bailiff returned and read the verdict. On the charge of financial fraud, not guilty. On the charge of securities manipulation, not guilty. A wave of applause attempted to break out, but Judge Sterling quickly gavelled it down. She did not adjourn. Instead, her face set in a look of resolute determination, she turned to the prosecution table. Given the irrefutable evidence of a massive, ongoing criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice, commit attempted murder, and manipulate the markets, all presented by the defense, this court is immediately issuing an order for the preliminary seizure of all U.S.-based assets of Veritas Pharmaceuticals and related Medusa Group subsidiaries implicated in Defense Exhibit T5. Furthermore, this entire transcript and all evidence are to be forwarded to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. It was the ultimate vindication, not just a verdict of innocence, but a systemic counterattack against the powers that had betrayed them both. In the quiet aftermath, Jason Scoffield found Spencer packing his few belongings. Spencer, you saved my life, my company, and my life's work. I want you to be my general counsel. $5 million, fully vested, effective immediately. Spencer paused, holding his bruised hand. Thank you, Mr. Scoffield. But I didn't do this for the money or for a partnership. He pulled a document from his pocket. The news had broken just minutes after the verdict. The Judicial Review Board had issued a public statement acknowledging the overwhelming evidence of corporate undue influence and racial bias in his case from 28 years ago. They formally reinstated his active legal status. I fought Veritas because they destroyed my life, not yours, Spencer said with a gentle smile. My fight isn't over yet. Refusing the generous offer, Spencer took a modest consultancy fee to cover his immediate needs. Weeks later, the windows of a small, storefront office in a less affluent part of the city bore a new, hand-painted sign, Johnson Legal, PC. Spencer didn't go back to high-powered corporate law. He established the Spencer Johnson Legal Justice Fund, dedicating his practice to taking on civil rights cases and fighting systemic discrimination, specifically against the very type of corporate malice and judicial bias that had once ruined him. The former janitor had not just won a case, he had reclaimed his identity and created a powerful legacy, proving that true justice often requires the courage of the forgotten to fight the corruption of the powerful. If you believe everyone deserves a fair chance, regardless of their wealth or station, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about everyday heroes standing up against corporate discrimination.